So I'm kind of bottom drawer. Will comes in here with a whiteboard. I come with a bucket. And we'll explain what the bucket is here in a minute. But I'm wondering if y'all are like me, if you've ever had one of those situations where you know you need some help, and you know you're not going to be able to figure it out on your own, and you're just like, you know what, I need to just go to someone else, go to another brother and ask, what am I doing wrong? What's going on? And you're just wide open. And I had a situation like that here recently where there were some things going on in my relationship with God where I was like, I'm not getting it. I need somebody to help me understand this. So I got with one of my friends from Engage, and I just, as Hank likes to say, pride was out the window. I was like, man, listen, can you explain this to me? And so we got together, and we sat down and started talking. I said, look, this is a younger brother. And I said, I've watched your life, and one thing I've noticed about you is you just enjoy God. I've seen the joy in your life, and the joy is the thing that I don't seem to get. The joy always seems to escape me, and I don't understand why, and I'm tired of not having it. And I was like, but you seem to get it, so can you explain to me how this works? And so, we just sat and we talked. He asked me a lot of questions, and one of the things that seemed to keep coming up in that conversation was that it seems that I don't really see God the way He truly is. And what's more, I don't see myself the way God sees me. And as we went through that conversation, we dug up a lot of things. And really, at the end of it, I don't think I was really any closer to the answer. But I was very encouraged by having a friend that would just sit down and be honest with me like that. But I walked away just resolving, like, I'm going to keep praying about this because I think there's something. So I kept seeking God, and I kept praying. And one of the things that God kept showing me was that I am a very exacting person. I set impossibly high standards. What I mean is, in my life, in every area of my life, whether it's at work or at home or in ministry, no matter how much I do or how much I accomplish or how much I get, it's never enough for me. I always feel like, no, I should have done more, or I could have done more, or I could have achieved more. And I'm always setting these impossibly high standards for myself. I'm never satisfied. And I wish I could say it just stops with me. But the reality is, I do the same thing to other people. I set impossibly high standards for others. And one place where this really shows up, it's really obvious, is at work. So I have a team of people that works for me, and for them, I drive them, and I set really high standards for them, and basically no matter how much they accomplish, it's never really enough for me. And when they do a really great job, I don't really reward them or encourage them about that, but let me tell you, if they mess up, they're going to hear about it. And I may not bust their heads, but sometimes even inside, even if I don't say anything, I'm kind of inside, I'm just kind of like, how could he do that? So I've got these really high standards. And, this kind of really came to light here recently in a way that was pretty humbling. And basically what happened was I did like a survey. It's called the 360 survey. And it's called that because you basically send out an anonymous survey to people that you work with. And it's 360 because it's people above you, people below you, and people that work at the same level as you. So you're asking everyone basically, how am I doing? And this particular survey, it rated basically how you're doing in 5 different types of behaviors that are the key to being an effective leader. And at the end of that, I got this big set of results, and there were 50 questions on the thing, and the questions were ranked 1 through 50. And it was basically number 1, this question, the most people said, yeah, you do good at this. And number 50 was this is your worst thing. And you know what my number 50 was? It was celebrating success. So I'm looking at that piece of paper and I'm like, you know, the thing that I value the most, I want to encourage people, that's the thing I'm doing the absolute least. So at this point, you guys are probably wondering, okay, Damon, what does this have to do with being closer to God? And so I'm going to explain that, because I read something as I went through this process. And what it said was, if you set impossibly high standards for yourself and for others, it probably means that you don't have the right view of God. Like, you don't cut anyone else any slack, and you don't cut yourself any slack, so you don't expect God to. And when I read that, I'm like, I think there's something to that. So I'm going to start asking God to help me understand this better. So I started praying, and I started looking in the Word. And so as I began that journey, I had this encounter. And it opened my eyes. Basically, what happened was I met this guy. I'd never met this guy before. And we're just talking, and I'm asking him a few questions about himself, trying to get to know him. And he's telling me about some plans that he was making. And inside, I'm kind of like mentally rolling my eyes. I'm like, oh, come on, give me a break. This guy, he thinks he's, you know, so smart and his plan is so great, but this guy doesn't have a clue. And as I walked away from that conversation, God convicted me. And he said, Damon, you're being judgmental. You're judging this guy. You don't even know this guy. And yet you have all this stuff welling up inside you against him. You're judging him. And so now God had my attention. And so I started searching the Scripture about judgment. And I read this Scripture. It's Matthew 7:1. Let me read what this says. It says, this is Jesus talking, and he says, do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Let me repeat that. By your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. So I want to stop right now and just talk about standard of measure for a second. Because if you can understand this, I think you'll be able to understand what I'm talking about. So right here, I have two standards of measure. They both say 1 gallon. And this says 1 gallon. And the thing you have to understand is, at the time when Jesus said that, in the ancient times, the idea of standard of measure was when you went around and conducted trade with people, you set the standard of measure. So if you were the tradesman, you had your own weights and measures. It wasn't like, you know, you go to Sheetz and there's a sticker from the government that says, you know, this gas pump is guaranteed to pump out, you know, an exact gallon when it says a gallon. There was nothing like that. It was just you set your own standard. So if I used like you know, a cheating set of measures where I could say, yeah, this is a pound, but it's not really a pound, then when I sell to you, I'm cheating you. Or like if I had like this, I say like, hey, this is a gallon, really. And so you ask for a gallon of whatever from me, so I measure it to you with this, then I'm cheating you. And actually, if you look in Scripture, there's a bunch of places where God says, like, I hate a dishonest scale. I hate dishonest weights, because that was a very common way of basically stealing from people. So when Jesus said that, by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you, they all knew exactly what he was talking about. And basically, what it means is, if this is your standard of measure that you measure to other people, this little tiny cup, that's the standard of measure that you're going to receive from God. So in my case, I'm being judgmental. I'm using a very exacting little tiny measure with other people. And so I don't experience God's grace. I just get it in this little cup. So let me continue my story. I had that one encounter, and then a few days later, I had another encounter. And this was a situation at work. And basically what was going on was there was a lady from HR who was trying to get me to take this training course. And I did not want to take this course. And I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but I was trying to take the approach of, if I ignore this, it will go away. Well, it didn't work out that way. She was relentless, and she went over my head and made sure that I had to go to this course. So I had no choice. I didn't want to be there, but I showed up at a certain conference room at a certain time, and I'm expecting multiple people to be here for this training. Instead, the room is empty, and I walk in, and then as I go in there, there's all these people like standing outside the door, and they're like, so I kind of go out there, I'm like, what are you guys here for? And then one lady's like, I'm here for my staff meeting. She's like, I got this conference room right now. What are you doing in here? So basically, I get kicked out of the room. There's no training. There's no people there. So I basically get kicked out of the room. I'm standing out in the hall, and you know what my thought was as I'm walking away from that conference room, embarrassed? My thought was, she's going to pay. She's going to pay. And right then, God got a hold of me. By your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Now I really started to understand. God's telling me, Damon, this is your gallon. This is your bucket. This little tiny thing that you measure stuff out to people with. And this is why you don't experience my grace. Because even though I don't change who God is, I don't change the reality of His grace, I don't experience it if this is my standard of measure. And God's saying, you need to get a bucket. If you want to experience me, if you want to experience my grace, you need to get a bucket and you need to use it for other people. And pour yourself out. Pour out grace on them. Stop judging them. Get a bucket. And then you'll get more of me in your bucket. So I don't know about you guys. Judgment, you may be looking at me going, Damon, man, you're a harsh dude. What's wrong with you, man? But judgment is a subtle thing. And so I want to ask you, dig down a little bit. Do you ever find yourself looking at other people and saying, you know what, I'm better than that guy? If so, you might be judging them. Do you ever find yourself looking at someone else and saying, man, I would never do that? You might be judging. Do you find yourself, are you highly critical of people? When you either internally or externally, but probably behind their back, are you kind of like, man, he does this, and he does this, and he does this, and he does this? If you're highly critical, it's probably you being judgmental. Or maybe there's just a person in your life where they've never done anything to you. They haven't wronged you in any way, and yet when you think about that person, there's just like a little in your gut about that person. Like, I'd just as soon not see that person. And if you have someone like that or multiple people like that in your life, it may be because you're judgmental towards them. So I think that if we're honest with ourselves, I think we can all find a measure of this judgment in us. And if so, it means we're not experiencing God's grace in the measure that He meant for us to experience. So what are we going to do about that? I don't know about you, but I want a different standard of measure. I want a bucket. And so this is a fresh journey for me, and this has just been happening in the last several weeks. So I'm kind of new on this journey, but I want to share with you a few of the things that God has shown me so far. So the first thing I would suggest to you to do is examine yourself and ask God to examine you. What I found was, as I got on my knees and said, God, will you show me why I'm not experiencing you? And then further, when He showed me about judgment, I'm like, God, will you show me where I'm judging people? It went from something that I was completely oblivious to something that almost every single day I'm noticing, oh, I'm doing it again. And He's really sensitized me to it. So if you will ask God to show you, He will reveal it. The second thing is ask. And what I mean by that is sit down with another brother that you know walks close to God, but someone who knows you. And just ask them, do you see this in me? Do you see me being judgmental? And I got to tell you, the conversation that I had with that friend, just being willing to say, you know what, I'm wide open. You just tell me what you see. That opened a door for me to understand all of this, and I believe to get closer to God. And the last thing is confess. I've done a lot of confession over the last several weeks. I've brought stuff to God, but I've also sat down with others and confessed things to them. Safe people, so I've actually done a lot of talking with my wife, because for me, my wife is a safe person. And what I found is, even I've gone and I've said, hon, you know this guy over here, like, I've been judging him. I finally realized that. And then the next day, I'll come back to her and I'll say, remember yesterday when I said I was judging this guy? After we talked about that, God showed me that at a deeper level, like, I'm judging him again about something else. So it was like multiple layers of confession. But that has helped kind of, it's like you got to squeeze the pus out of the wound, basically. And that's what I've been doing. In the confession process, you can talk to God about it, but there's something about sitting down with another brother and having the words come out of your mouth. There's healing in that. So I encourage you to do the confession part. So the thought I want to leave you with, keeping in mind the bucket, I want to leave you with this quote. And this, ironically enough, this quote comes from a lady named Nancy Spiegelberg, who is a children's author. But listen to this. Lord, I crawled across the barrenness to you with my empty cup, uncertain in asking any small drop of refreshment. If I had only known you better, I'd have come running with a bucket. So this morning, I'm going to pass out some questions, and these are designed to just help you dig into this area of judgment in your lives and expose it wherever it may be, and hopefully to help you find your bucket. And so I just want to, in closing, this has been a process for me. It's a journey, and so I want to give you a little hint about what's ahead. As you seek God about this, what will happen is, at first God will show you one person. He'll say, you're judging this person. And then after a while, it's kind of like a floodgate opens, and you start realizing, I'm doing this all the time. And you'll just keep recognizing it. And at a certain point, I've kind of gotten to where, okay, God, I see it, I recognize it, and I keep confessing it. But what do I do with this? What do I replace it with? And what God has shown me is, what is the opposite of judgment? It's grace. It's grace, the thing that we need the most from God, and the thing that He has given us in rich, rich measure. So God has shown me, start looking at these people the way I do, and deal with them the way I do with you. So forgive them. When they do wrong, forgive them. And then when you're kind of saying, like, well, they don't deserve that, or they just remember how I am with you. And then the truth is, God doesn't, God forgives us, but He doesn't take away the consequence of our sin. He doesn't, He doesn't just let it go easy for us, but He still loves us through that process. And so that would be my advice to you as you go through this. Start to look at people the way God looks at them, and ask Him to show you, how does He look at you? So get your bucket on.